Like,
All right, hi everyone. We're a minute early up. The time just changed. I'm your host, Adam Asnes. Uh, Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining on time. In particular, usually over the next couple of minutes, the attendee list goes like this, and this was a fairly well registered webinar again. So welcome. Thank you for joining again. Uh, Lingoport puts on these webinar series just about monthly. Once in a while, we miss a month, but we always like to bring in people from the industry that we either know as customers or that we meet that have a lot to say, and this is no exception to that. So today we're going to bring you Teresa Toronjo. Um, she's coming. You're in the Netherlands, right? I should know that. Um,
I'm in sunny Seville at the moment, but yes, I
Oh,
was in the
yeah,
Netherlands until like
we talked
literally
about
like
that.
months ago. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm mentally almost there still.
All right, Seville, a very nice place to be. Um, very good. I'm in sunny Colorado. It warmed up today, so that's nice. It's been a very cold winter. Um, in any case, we're going to talk about bridging gaps, a very common theme in the industry. That a lot of localization professionals have trouble with. I'm going to mention that Teresa is not a customer of Lingoport, so she's giving an independent view. This is not a webinar about Lingoport products or services and the like. If you want to learn that, please go to lingoport.com. It's funny, we're doing this for so many years, but people still don't necessarily know what we do, so I'll just give our company a plug. Lingoport is very much focused on software localization technical issues. So we have all kinds of automation for internationalization to support developers internationalizing as they develop code. So the software is always world ready, and adding a locale is just really easy. Um, as well as legacy code, adapting it for internationalization requirements, and localization automation that fits really well into the software development stack. So the developers don't have any additional work, but it's very easy for loc managers to connect the software repositories, Git type uh, repositories to all kinds of different resources, from localization portals to all major TMSs and more, AI, whatever you want to connect it to. And it does a really cool round trip between those different resources, checks everything. It's much, much more than a Git connector. And also, there's no onus to set that up. It literally takes about 5 minutes to add projects and the like. It's like click, 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 select your locales, and you're good to go. So that's my little plug. More and more people are logging in, so let's get to it. I'm going to introduce Teresa. Whoops, I jumped ahead. That's because my mouse is super sensitive. A little introduction to Teresa. She has been in the industry for over 12 years working on language related tasks. She really comes from a great deal of preparation from the translation background. I am always impressed when someone goes from being a translator or interpreter all the way to managing localization. It's a big strategic jump, and it isn't necessarily taught everywhere. So it really takes a special kind of individual. And as we're going to share in that road, you learn a lot, and you have to tackle a lot of things within organizational resistance. And of course, the culture is different at various companies in terms of the acceptance of that. But I should say, it's not listed here, but Teresa has a couple of master's degrees, both in translation and interpreting over 6 different languages, actually three of each, English, Italian, Spanish, quite a bit of flexibility, but also legal translations, which is its own thing, although just a little part of the work that she does now in terms of her involvement. But she really comes from doing, not just understanding, which is really where I come from. Never been a translator. Language skills are not very good for me, but uh, let's talk about Teresa a little bit more. She, as I said, I got it totally wrong. It's even written on the slide. She lives in Seville. She has two children. Um, and a husband, also not listed here. She has a history of being a referee and teacher for fencing, which I think is super cool. I fenced in high school, but that's like ancient history. But so we'll see how she parries and reposts the various questions we have here. All right, so here we go. Click. All right, first question number one. Oh, and by the way, I almost forgot to mention, there is a Q&A interface here. We actually already got some questions ahead of time, which I have to switch documents to get to, but there was a Q&A list here, button here on Zoom. I'd like you to use that versus the chat. Uh, for your questions. I always advise people that when you have a question appear to you based on something that a panelist says, that you write it down right away. Don't wait till the end of the webinar, because if you're like me, you sort of forget. Or, you know, don't worry if we answer that question later on. It's not a problem. But the questions are kind of one of the most fun parts of this webinar. All right, here we go. Whoop. Jumping ahead of myself. All right. Uh, I should say Teresa works at Malt as a localization manager. Malt is a site used to find and enable freelancers around Europe. It is very much localized into various different European markets in particular, where the laws and practices might be different. So it's more than just a language translation that she has to worry about. All right, when you join Malt, what were the biggest localization challenges and surprises you uncovered?
Okay, so well, first of all, thanks Adam for the introduction. I love the pun with fencing. I hope I can answer the questions and give a little bit of insight. Like you said, you mentioned during the introduction, the culture is different in every company. So I kind of feel I've been working for several companies now. I kind of feel that every time I join a new company, there are surprises. And surprises are not always positive, but always interesting. And at Malt specifically, there there were some unique characteristics that I really, really liked. The thing or the biggest surprise for me was actually, and I'm going to say this, and some people are going to hate me, but when I joined, they were like, oh, and by the way, it's part of your responsibility to open new markets. And I was like, what? I don't have to fight for that? You know how localization specialists are like trying to get like a seat at the table when it comes to opening new markets. And although um, the localization team was not part of the decision-making process, they are basically the first team to be involved when the decision has been made, because it's part of my job to open new markets. So I do all the coordination and the execution of that opening of that new market. So that was like, wow, great positive surprise. And I think maybe an example of like not negative, but a bit of like a shock when I joined was that they were using our TMS at Mount to introduce changes in content depending on the market where the content was being displayed. So just to give you an example, if you have English and you use English across, I don't know, you use English in France, you use English in Germany, you use English in the UK, but maybe you have three different numbers for the support team or emails for the support team, depending on where your country is. So they were actually manually putting these email addresses inside the TMS, so opening an entire new locale just to introduce these small changes. So it looked like we had 19 or like 17 locales from which we were actually effectively using 5. So it was crazy to me when I joined. I was like, what is this? And that came from a lack of knowledge on internationalization. So that was really interesting as well when I joined. It was like immediately I picked up on that.
I was going to say, when that's returned to the repo, that could create quite a conflict, actually. Okay, very good.
It was crazy, crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, on to the next one. Here we go. Uh, you were the only localization expert at Malt. Um, how did that impact your role in the early days?
So, although I've worked in several companies, Malt was the first company that I joined where I was not only the only localization expert, but the first localization expert in the sense that they had identified someone internally to take over the role. And I think this happens in many companies. In fact, I was trying to help someone from another company who is in this situation. She's not a localization specialist, but they were like, oh, and by the way, you're going to be in charge of localization now. And she was like, what? So we were talking about it and discussing what are like the main, like the basic things that she can do. And it happens very often, and it happens more and more because there are so many startups that in the startups sometimes they're like, well, they just go with it. They're not expecting to have maybe that impact or that growth, and then all of a sudden it happens, and they don't understand the importance of hiring someone early on to oversee that. So having said that, when I joined Malt, and I was not only the only but the first expert, it was really interesting because on the one hand, the person that was there before me, not having any constraint on how she thought about localization, she did some very interesting and really positive things, like, for example, getting the ownership of the opening of the new markets. But on the other
Mhm.
hand, also some things had been established um, that I didn't particularly think were positive for localization. And it was difficult to change that mentality that people had. Um, so, for example, um, like quality wise, it was like, okay, well, the markets, like people internally can do that because we've been doing it. So we are checking quality internally with just asking random people to check on the quality or the translations or things like that. Or we will just ask people to use machine translation, and then someone will check, someone from whatever team. And it's, you have to fight against that. And it's more difficult because that hasn't happened before you arrive. Luckily at Mouth, I think I put it on my LinkedIn post when I posted about this. I'm really spoiled. They're really, a really cool company. And in fact, when I joined, my first 3 months were dedicated to conducting a localization audit. So that really helped me the first 30 days. I was actually talking with people. I met more than 80 people, spent more than 80 hours talking to people, engineers and product managers and product designers and the UX writer who had joined at the same time as I did, and the user research expert and the marketing team, the legal team, some of the sales representatives, some general managers, really like people from the customer care team.
Mhm.
So I think that really helped as well. Um, get people to know me and be like, oh, ooh, now we have an expert in house.
Just as an aside, in the area of career advice, you came from Workday, which they're a Lingoport customer, so I have some exposure. It's very well established globalization team, really expanded by Loy, who is now retired. Loy's been a past guest on these webinars, but real senior people, and I would imagine the the scope of responsibility was very much, you do this, and then you go to Malt and you do everything. And it, I mean, I've told my own kids, like, there's some real opportunities if you go to the smaller company and you do everything, and you're exposed to it all. And so chapeau to you, for being up to that challenge. It's very cool, so little, I don't know, for anybody budding here, a little career advice, like maybe don't only look at the really big established company. So
No, and I think that's, I mean, I'm not gonna expand on this because I know that's it's not what maybe people came to hear about, but if you're not afraid to take the responsibility and fail, make mistakes, if you're not afraid of making mistakes, then you should definitely do it because it's amazing. Yes.
right, cool. All right, great. Uh, what was your approach to convincing teams that localization needed to be prioritized?
So luckily, so I guess lucky for me, Malt is very local oriented in the
Mhm,
sense that, like you said, we have a freelancer marketplace and we like to cater locally. So the local customer, local focus, it's very much ingrained in the mentality of the people that work at Malt. So that was positive.
mhm,
But one thing is knowing it's important, and a complete different thing is prioritizing above something else. So you might
mhm,
tell me, oh yeah, Teresa, yeah, we know this is important, but not now. So there is it's a big difference there between what you say and what you actually end up doing. And I think that at the beginning, so the two things. The first thing is it's really important, or at least for me, to not try to make any very big changes during the first months at a company. So when I joined, I had to stop myself from rushing into solving problems from the get-go, because people can perceive that as you coming here, you don't know anything about us, and you're already telling us what we did wrong. So, you get a bit of like, you could get pushback or like a bit of, well, you know, maybe it would be nice for you to also highlight the things that we're doing well. Um, so I think the approach that I took at the beginning was to really take the time to talk to people and to understand how things worked, and to make sure that I wasn't introducing any big changes without first gaining the trust from the people I was going to be working with. And that meant that I focused on initiatives that I could do on my own without investment of time or effort from other teams, or with very little investment. Initiatives that had clear metrics so that I could finish something and say, oh, and this is, how much we reduced on costs. This is how much we cleared off the backlog. And this is how much we have sped up the process. And this is, in numbers, what that looks like. And then I zeroed in, because I started for the product team, and I zeroed in. I knew that what I really, really wanted was for the developers and the engineers to be on board with localization very quickly, because I know that that's where the problems come. So when localization managers are swamped because we keep putting out fires, that's coming from the engineering part. So it's coming from how the product is being developed, or like thought about and then put into place. And a lot of issues were coming from internationalization. So I mentioned at the beginning, actually manually putting an email instead of using a variable. That is internationalization. And if the engineers don't collaborate with you, or have, you start with the wrong relationship with them, it can be very difficult to turn that into a positive relationship when you can actually build things. So I focused a lot on them. And I actually very quickly tried to identify what they were unhappy about. And I did one or two initiatives to make their life easier. And I actually made it into a point to identify places where they could need help that I could actually help with, and jump into every opportunity to help them with stuff. Like, oh, you're exporting and importing this information because we don't have a link. Why don't I do that for you? And like, oh, I see that you need a specific format for this. So why don't I do that for you? And I know that we need to do this, but um, you know, like, it's no rush. You can like do it in like 1 or 2 months. It's not urgent, or because I know you have a lot on your plate. So I would say my approach was not to go too quickly, identify the people that I really wanted to start on a really good relationship with at the beginning, and then try to foster that collaboration and make their life easier, so that then they were like, ah, yeah, this Teresa, she joined and she already made our life so much easier. So when I come asking for things, they are much more willing to help me.
Very good. Very good. I like that. This is the developer question. It's kind of near and dear to my heart because that's who I work with. But uh, developers really, almost number one all the time is like uh, uh, the hairs on fire situation of a security problem, their product roadmap, and then localization. I mean, if I'm a developer, I want localization to kind of be like those automatic light sensors where you walk into a room and the light turns on. So like I do my work and then translation just happens. That's Teresa's problem. And so let's talk about, getting localization managers to take localization seriously and your approach there.
I think I mentioned a little bit before when we were talking about how to convince teams in general. And so I said, you really need to understand their pains and what they're unhappy about, and really focus on that. But also, I think I'm gonna say something that maybe it's not um, very popular, but there is um, and it's not my job mentality sometimes, both with localization managers and engineers. And because our jobs are so close together, if we don't both make the effort to get as close as possible, there is a gap. And in that gap, things fall. And it's when you say, I finished my work and now it's Teresa's job to do this. And when what my job is and what your job is not perfectly identified, then everything becomes a lot more problematic. And I think one of the first things that needs to be done is to really understand where someone's job ends and where someone's job starts, and what level of influence you have over how the other person works. So, for example, just to give you an example, when I joined Malt, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to use the plugin for the Figma tool, which is what our designers use, and connect it to the TMS that we use at Malt. And the reason was because I wanted the translators to have the context. But mostly I wanted the developers to not have to manually upload pictures or to manually add the key names to pictures that they have to upload into the TMS. And of course, what I really, really didn't want was for nobody to send any context, and then the translators were just trying to guess. And I made a mistake there. I made a mistake in that I was not 100% convinced that it was going to be helpful for them. But I thought, oh, well, they know better because they are the experts. It's not my job to know whether this is going to solve the problem or not. It's my job to tell them this exists, test it, and let me know. And I didn't really invest. I didn't close the gap. I let the gap open, and on their side, they probably, well, not they probably, but they thought, well, this is not our job, This is not our job. Our job is done when we're done developing this. So if we don't provide the screenshots, or if there is not an easy way for us to do that, we will provide them when we can and otherwise we won't. And that was my mistake. And I think that my biggest learning moment with that failed project back then, and now it's back on the road, and it's working because I approached it differently. But I guess you need to take their job very seriously, the work that they do. You need to understand how they work very well. You need to understand how their process works to the letter. You cannot say, oh, well, and then they do some work in Figma and then they do some stuff in the code and then the content appears in phrase. No, you need to know they go there, they do the key names and they are developing as they are developing the feature, they are creating the key names and then at the end they do a push and the push, it sends it to the tool and then, you know, so you need to know very specifically how they work because you need to be able to communicate effectively with them. And that's another problem. A lot of localization managers, they don't know how to communicate with engineers because they don't learn internationalization. And therefore, there is no effective communication. You complain that something doesn't work because you don't propose a solution or you cannot specifically point to what it is that it isn't working, it
Mhm.
just fails to be activated.
You know, that is such a good point. Like if you come to a developer and you say, well, I have like, look at this screen, this happens on this screen. It's never intuitively obvious for the developer to go, oh, I know where that is in the code. It's not like there's a place in the code, a chapter, like you'd have in a document that's about this screen. You know, it could be anywhere and it could be in a lot of different repositories. Especially with microservices, products are so compartmentalized and people just don't know where the stuff is. So being able to show, I have this problem, there is this bug, and this is what it is, and this is how you fix it, is a really big leap. Otherwise, the bug report just goes to Jira and it just sits there for 3 years. I've seen that in so many companies. So again, a lot of localization people that come from translation are kind of even intimidated by the developer world. Like if you say, you know, if you talk about version control or even just words like compile, like eyes glaze over, and I relate. I understand that, but if you're going to work with developers, you have to learn about the basics of what is a variable, what is a string, what is a concatenation, what is a method, function, whatever the programming languages uses, how does that relate to locale? Um, these are just basic concepts and they're not really that hard, but you have to sit in and roll your sleeves up and learn these things. And it will help you communicate. It really helps if your developer is interested also, but sometimes they're not. So anyway, enough.
But
I got to get off my high horse and go to the next question.
but I think you have a good point there when you say that sometimes they're interested, sometimes they're not, but and that you do need to learn that. But on the other hand, it's true that if you work in a big company, you were mentioning Workday. Sometimes it's easy to say there's someone else doing that. But when it's just you or a very small team like I am, you almost have no choice. And even when you find it scary, if you really want to do a good job, then you really have to go for it. Because otherwise, yeah, it's
Right.
difficult to make the change.
That's a good point. At Workday, they have some very, very technical people on the localization team. So
And very good technical
yes,
people, not just technical, but very
yes.
talented technical people.
You know, I will add is that sometimes the technical person at a localization company is not actually that good, but because the localization leader has no understanding of software, they think they walk on water. This is a little thing I don't want to get into, and I certainly won't name names, but I've seen it. All right. Customer support was the first team to come to you for help. Why do you think they saw localization as a priority before others?
Well, they had a big issue. And so the customer care team is also at Malt, the team responsible for the compliance part.
Mhm.
And you were talking about that, when you have a freelancer marketplace where you're working with people, regulations change depending on the country, types of companies change, type of information that you need to add, even for example, for the tax declarations and things like that. So a lot of the content that they were working with was in a homemade CMS, and it was very messy and it was not thought for localization. And that meant that they were doing a lot of manual work. And on top of that, you can imagine, I don't know if I've done a master's in legal translation, so this might sound very strange to some people, but I'm not a big fan of legal stuff terms, because you know how when they say, oh, you need to add this document or this number, and you're like, what? So you have the tooltips which explain to you where you can find such number, where you can find such document. And all that content was hard coded. And we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about hundreds
Mm-hmm.
of instances where this was happening. And it meant that not only did they have limited access to very important content, they had no access at all to some of the very relevant content that they were working with.
Mm-hmm.
And this meant that when a client or a user was complaining about something, they could not immediately react. They could not immediately solve the problem, which meant that there was a lot of backlog because, tickets coming in for the support team, the
Mm-hmm.
customer support team, which then had to escalate to the engineering team. But then the engineering team had to manually go into the code and change things based on what the customer care team was saying, but they also had to update the translations where they existed. And then you can imagine where do those translations come from? Machine translation,
Mm-hmm.
Google Translate, DeepL, whatever, copy paste, and then imagine all the possibilities of manual error on doing that at the same time. And then, of course, that meant that the engineers had many tickets and it was a backlog. So maybe in order to solve, like you said, the ticket in there for like 3 years, well, that was not the case. But yes, it was that it was becoming a bottleneck because we were having more and more different type of freelancers in many countries and companies in many countries for which you need new information. And so that information grows, and if you cannot make it scalable because you cannot access that content and automate the curation of that content, then it becomes very frustrating for the user who's complaining and has no answer, very frustrating for the customer support team that knows how to fix it but can't physically do it, frustrating for the engineering team because another team is dependent on them and they have a lot of work to do. And on top of that, they have to copy paste Google Translate translations and just in general for the company many hours spent on doing something that we should not be spending our time on doing.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess
Go
no,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say the static file problem is a very common thing that we detect. And in your case is more complicated, but it could be as simple as a user, like an agreement, like a user EULA that you sign,
Mhm.
and suddenly you have a different version of that EULA for every market, and it's just a translated document. But if it's hard coded in there, you're kind of stuck and you can't update it.
And I mean we have parts of a product that are difficult to work with, that I'm not focusing on just because they don't change so exponentially and they don't grow so exponentially. But the problem
Mhm.
here is that, like I said, compliance is so important. And not only so
Right.
important from a legal and customer support point of view, but also from like if you want to scale, you want to go to more countries. If you want to go to more countries, you need to be able to cater to more realities. And if you want to do that, you need to be able to do it in a way that doesn't mean someone just like typing away all day, all night, instance after instance after instance, because then what you hire more people or you're slower.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Got
So
it.
I
All
guess
right.
they were interested because they knew the problem that they had and they really needed help.
All right. Very good. All right. The legal team, this kind of relates to our last question, but uh, they were using Google Docs, and how did you actually mentioned Google Translate or DeepL? How did you convince them to move to a structured translation workflow?
So initially I didn't. So initially I had other priorities, and so we were supporting their requests because they were making very small changes on their Google documents and then highlighting them
Mm,
saying, yeah, fantastic. So they were like, oh, we've made this change. And it worked. It worked because it was very few changes and very, every 3 months maybe or every 2 months there was a change. And so it was fine. And then a huge revamp of one of our legal documents. And legal documents, they're not one page, they are like, long and complex. And they really did like a complete revamp of one of the documents. And then they asked for the translations. And I was like, oh no, this is not like cheap anymore, like making really small changes. This is really not, this is going to cost us a lot of money.
Mhm.
So I took the existing content that we had and I created a translation memory by aligning the segments. And then I ran an analysis of the file and I said, okay, well, if we do it through the tool that we're using through our TMS, we will be saving 40% on the translations. And I mean, we're talking about a big project. So there, I told them, this is the time that I spent. This is a time that I would need extra to be able to run it through our TMS. And this is the return on investment that we would have. And, it was not difficult to convince them after that.
You didn't mention the quality of the legal translation perhaps changing. Was that, because if you get legal wrong, there's consequences
Yes.
if the condition
It's,
happens that causes that consequence.
and well, I think this happens a lot at startups and scale ups. Sometimes they're not conscious of the importance of how specific some terms can be. So a term that you might be using, like for example, hire, that you might not want to use because of specific rules in a specific country. So basically it has legal consequences.
Mhm.
But they were not concerned about that. So
Mm.
so I didn't bring it up to convince them because it was not a concern. It was my concern, but I
Mhm.
didn't need it to get their buy-in because it was not their concern. And so I guess that's important to mention. Do not sell. Yes, what I don't do is sell what I think it's important to people who are not concerned about that specific thing,
Mm.
if that makes any sense.
That makes a
So
lot of sense, but that's a temptation that I think few people could resist.
yeah, I mean, my husband, he's a consultant for copywriting, and he says, what I always tell companies, and I learned this from him, is don't tell people what you want to say to them. Tell people what they need to hear, what they need to know. And so that's my approach.
That's one of the key points we're going to put in the summary, I think. All right, good, good. All right. Did okay, this is, you know, maybe something they wanted to hear. Did 40% cost reduction in legal translations help them to showcase the impact of localization to the leadership team?
To the legal team, yes. To the leadership team, no. I
Hmm.
think well, I think no, I'm pretty sure that today, because all the AI, new technologies, automation, et cetera, that's like the minimum we are expected to do. And I feel that the pressure goes up in that sense to reduce costs.
Hmm.
And it's like this is almost what you're expected to be doing, this 40% reduction,
Hmm.
not from a very well automated AI supported flow, but from a manual, not supported at all flow to the best flow that you could have. This is the minimum that leadership expects from you.
Hmm.
And also when it's the approach that I use when I talk to teams is different to when I talk to leadership, in that for the legal team, the money was important because initially they didn't have a budget, which now they do. And so that's the direction in which I was going. But when I try to share with the leadership team, I focus more on the value of the automation of the process, um, the time that I free from teams that can be dedicating that time to something else, that it's not manual work. And it's beneficial for the localization industry in that it goes a bit away from the cost center mentality, always trying to show how we save and moving a bit more towards the strategy and the growth enabler mentality. So what I was saying with the customer care team, I wasn't focusing there on, oh, well, they now have access to it. No, I was saying, you want to grow. You want to have more markets. You want to have more freelancers. You want to have more companies. This is the way to go.
That's great. That's really great. Someone, almost everybody in our industry knows Renato Beninato at Nimsy. For a long time, he says, if you save a company $1 million, they'll give you a Starbucks card. If you expand a market, and if you expand markets and increase sales, you get a promotion. So,
Even more so today, I think.
yes, yeah. I mean, he first said that I think in like 2002 or something like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
Okay. All right.
a visionary, yes,
Yes.
definitely.
All right. Initially, the marketing team rejected the HubSpot TMS integration. What went wrong, and how did you turn that around later?
Yeah, so I think this goes to what I said at the beginning. I made a mistake on the timing, and I did not dedicate the right amount of time to building the connections within the team and finding the right entry point. So I was pitching quality to legal, basically, like to put it like I said
Uh-huh.
before,
Uh-huh.
I was pitching the wrong value proposition to the wrong people in the company. And that's okay. I learned from my mistake. That's also where I thought, oh, this is, I was saying the wrong thing to the wrong people. Um, I stopped. I said, okay, I stop now. I was going on maternity leave. I will pick it up when I'm back. And then I had planned to do it later. I said, okay, well, this is my plan for the year. I want to centralize. I've already started with legal, with the customer care team, the product team. So I had other projects. And then I was like, and then I will do marketing. And then the opportunity came. One of the product teams one of the product designers I work very closely with mentioned that they were working with marketing for some emails. And I was like, now that you mentioned that, can I come to your calls with the marketing team? And she was like, sure. And so she invited me to the channel. And I was like, hey, how are you going to manage this? Because it's from product and I don't want you to, take the heat that you have to then manage also our content. And so I started to talk with the right people, and I took the opportunity, and now this is actually like being developed as we speak. So it's really interesting how, if you talk with the right people at the right moment, it's almost mind blowing. Like I went out of that meeting where I was like actually presenting the plugin, and there were like 7 people in that meeting, and everyone was just like, when can we start?
Nice.
And I thought, what happened? Why didn't it work before? And it worked now. And then that's when I started to think about it. And I was like, oh, I made this mistake and I made that mistake. And that didn't work. And of course, I should have done that differently. So yeah.
Very good. Very good. Um, I'm gonna say that I have dragged out this thing a little bit by our back and forth. So we probably need to speed up a little bit to get time for questions. You introduced automation across multiple teams. What were the biggest wins from that?
So I'll just, like, in one word, recognition. Which is what we are expected to bring today. This is what we are expected to bring. And so it was the recognition from the team and saying, yes, the technology is advancing and we're not staying behind. We are staying, and not ahead, but together with, the pioneers or the people implementing things at the very beginning. And yeah, so the recognition from the company that we are not staying behind, but we're actually
Very
spearheading
good.
some of the initiatives.
Great. Okay. What advice would you give to other localization managers trying to introduce TMS automation into different departments?
Go for it and be willing to get it wrong and get stuck and don't wait for it to be perfect. I hear a lot of people say, yeah, but we need that feature to also do X, or yeah, but what would really, really be nice if it's then, listen,
Sure.
you have what you have, use what you have today. That's going to give you the advantage to really say what you need in the future. Because if you don't use it, you don't really know. You think you know what you would potentially need, but until you don't actually start using the technology, you don't really know. You don't know the reality of what you are looking for.
I think this is our last official question. What would you do differently?
Um, Dedicate the teams the time that they deserve. So, like with marketing, really dedicate the time and not just try to push it. Don't propose anything if you don't strongly believe in it yourself. The
Hmm.
plugin, when I first proposed it for Figma, for example, say no more. And especially if there are initiatives that don't have clear success metrics, they don't have a clear problem to solve, and they don't have a clear connection to the company objectives. Always talk um, as we, even if it's just you, like I said, we in the localization team, we. And some people are like, it's just you. And it's like, no, it's we, because I do it with the engineers. I work with the customer support team, and I work with the project manager, and I work with the, and so when you start to think about we and you include everyone, people start to be part of your team. And share a lot. Go to speak at events, send papers for conferences, send articles to multilingual. There is a way in which you can actually send articles if you want,
Hmm.
and actually put it out there so that other people can learn from the mistakes that you've made and the things that you did well.
I'll just say sending something to multilingual is a really good thing for yourself in terms of thinking clearly also. It's years ago, but there was a while where I had a regular column in multilingual, um, which really just started with me writing something up and sending it to them and seeing if they would do it. And then I was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to do it again. And before I know, I didn't even try to get it. They just assigned me a column, and I did that for like 2 years. So
And just for the people
really,
listening, there is a portal there in multilingual. So there is a place
uh,
where you can submit what you write, and then they will get in touch with you. So do it.
yeah, they weren't so sophisticated back when I did that, but yeah, yeah.
Now they have a port, like a place where you can
Right,
do it.
right. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. All right, super. All right. Oh, we did have one more question. I'll entertain it. What was the biggest misconception about localization?
Quality.
Uh-huh.
What it is and what it isn't. And I always used to educate people about this. There are some paintings that are really well done, but where the subject is really horrible, like, I don't know, like doctors and things like that. And I always ask, do you like this painting? And people will be like, no, we don't like it. It's horrible. And then you ask them, is it a good painting? And it is. It's a good painting. The
Hmm.
colors, the light, the structure.
Hmm.
Um, and it's the biggest misconception is, what quality is and how difficult or not it is to measure, and whether it's something that you can measure or not, and whether it's a preference
Hmm.
or something that you can actually say, yes, that is good, or no, that isn't.
Got it. Okay. One piece of advice you would give.
Identify the people that want to work with you. So identify your customer support team that really has a problem to be solved that can help the company grow. Help them and use them
Mm.
as your ambassadors to then get the buy-in from other teams.
Okay. All right. Time for questions. We have a few. I will just, sort of the shameless plug. If you're interested in Lingoport, just visit lingoport.com. There's um, always new blog articles on there. We try to stay current and write about issues. There's webinar recordings. If you like this webinar, there's lots of them in our library. Just choose under resources, the webinar selection. And then, of course, you can learn about our products and services there. If for some reason you just want to reach me, it's very easy. Adam@lingoport.com does get to me. All right, we did have some questions. Kate, if you're on the line hiding out, I need you to look at LinkedIn Live. I don't see those questions. I
Sure,
just see
sure, no
what's.
problem. No problem, I will.
And plus, we had somebody who wanted to be on the record. Like they knew they couldn't attend, so they wrote some questions ahead, and they wanted to see the recording. Oh, and by the way, everybody here, you'll get a recording link. So that's often the first question is the recording. Kate, what you got for me?
I don't have anything in LinkedIn yet.
Okay, what about the questions that came in ahead of time? I just don't have that document up and handy.
Okay, I thought you have it, sorry.
I do, but then I have to take this off of my monitor, and I didn't plan
Hey,
on
wait a
that.
second.
Yeah. Maybe I should take it off my monitor. Let's see.
It's okay, I found it. So the first question was, what have been the biggest challenges you faced in connecting the teams and how you overcome them?
Yeah, so time when it's just you doing everything, you sometimes prioritize solving the small things, the immediate things, and you are like, oh, I don't have time to talk with that team. I don't have time to talk with that person. And it's better to prioritize and say no to smaller things or to things that are not so urgent and dedicate that time to talking with the right people. And another thing is sometimes we want to help. And by helping, we put on ourselves more responsibility and we reduce friction on places where we should keep it if we want like the long-term vision. So say, for example, I want the developers to not hard code text. I am not going to remove the friction by saying, oh, I will go into the code and copy paste the stuff myself, like I will learn how to do that and I will go and I will do it. No, I want it to stay a problem because my ultimate goal is for that content to not be there. And so if I remove that friction, I am working against myself, basically.
Okay.
I sent a couple more questions in the chat. I think you saw them.
Yes, I have them open. Okay. What tools or methodologies have been key to optimizing communication and collaboration between these teams?
So before I talk about tools, something that I meant to say before and I didn't, but I think it's important is that people in our industry, sometimes we are not salespeople or we're not customer support people, and we're not used to talking with a lot of people. Maybe we don't like that. We like to work with our computer at home where we don't have to interact a lot with other teams. So if this is you, the best advice that I can give you here is more than tools or methodologies to optimize the communication is get out there and do it. Like actually plan that one-on-one with that person and talk with them. But then in terms of tools, I did a localization audit that was super powerful. The amount of information I gathered from there, very structured as well for every team. And so when I go and I talk with them, I know I have like an outline of what their most important issues are, or the things that they're most concerned about, or how their success is measured by the company as well. And a lot of documentation, localization centralized page I have, and I have a lot of localization training for different teams that I've done through the months, years now, and that it's available for everyone. And so sometimes it also saves you time, so you can just redirect people to the right resources and free up your time for more strategic topics.
I'm just going to add some of the more generalized, it's obvious to me, but maybe not everybody. Slack or Teams are really, really important. I mean, and with so many distributed teams, especially post-COVID, where less and less people actually have a physical office where they come into, those tools are invaluable. Have a video chat, not just typing something. Although if you need a quick answer, that's true also. But I'm always really, from a development perspective, impressed with how Slack in particular, because that's what we use at Lingoport, links to repositories, and you can link it with all kinds of continuous systems, and it's it's like what it's built for. And what you're speaking about is the physical evidence with a localization audit, but the conduit is, it already exists, and we just need to take advantage of it. All right. What mistakes did you make in the integration process, and what would you do differently today?
I think I mentioned a couple of mistakes that I made, like pushing for the plugin for Figma at the wrong time, or pushing the wrong value to the wrong people in marketing. Another example I can think of is I can't be very specific about the details because it's a bit sensitive, but I wanted to change a bit the approach in terms of how we do globalization and Malt. And what I wanted to do was in a document saying, we will not do this in 2024. And that's what I wanted to do. And I pushed and I pushed and I talked with so many people, and I talked with general managers, and I knew they wanted this too. And I talked with salespeople and I got numbers, and I talked with project managers, and I talked with product managers, with product directors that were, they wanted to do what I was suggesting. And the amount of effort and time that I put in there, I should not have. I should have said, okay, this is obviously a no. I wait maybe until next year, or I wait until there is a good opportunity to bring up this topic again. And what do you know? The topic came up again this year. So maybe we'll talk about it at the end of the year or beginning of next year. But I learned a very valuable lesson, and that is at Malt in particular. When we say we are not going to do something, we don't do it. And that's important. It's almost as important as when we're going to do something, we do it, because at least people know where to focus their effort. And so my advice would be focused on where your company is heading, and don't try to push for things that would take a lot of effort and that your company is clearly not looking at doing today. It doesn't mean that they won't tomorrow.
All right, very good. How do you, I think this is going to be our last question, but how do you measure the success of these initiatives? Are there specific KPIs that you monitor?
So depending on the company, you have like OKRs, you have a set of objectives, you have goals and key metrics. And so independently of how you call it, I guess my most important, the way in which I do it is I take the yearly objectives of the company and what the metrics are. And then I look at what I have on my backlog that I want to do, like the strategies that I want to put into place and what fits best into that direction. And then I measure. So I look for KPIs in order to be able to measure that. So for example, the years when we launch new markets, reducing by X% the time spent on testing, or reduce by X% the money spent on testing, increase by X% the SEO traffic of specific pages, parts of the product, reduce by X% the backlog, reduce by whatever the number of managed words, the time to market, for quality, number of language related tickets, for example, if you don't have an automation, which hopefully in 2025 we will, or for example, reduce by X% the number of translation requests with issues. So requests where things go wrong and then they take forever because there's a lot of forth and back. So how many of those do we have, and what percentage of our requests have issues? And one of the first things that I did that I'm very proud of is have 100% visibility over localization expenses. So that wasn't there, and it was one of the first things that I did. And you can imagine that once you have that information, it's also very useful for conversations.
Very good. All right. I want to thank you very much. I've enjoyed this terrifically. It's been great to get to know you as well. So thank you for joining the webinar as our guest. And thank you everyone for hanging on. That's kind of a testament to the usefulness of the information. So you'll be getting a recording link in your email. There's nothing you have to do. And I wish everybody well. Have a great Wednesday, or excuse me, Thursday or Friday if you're in that part of the world or wherever you are. Take care. Thank you. Have a good evening, Teresa.